Hey there! So we know a lot already about our storage layer, data lake, how it should be structured, what feature it has, why we want to use it. So it's a high time to start loading data to our data lake. And that's the topic for today, because today I would like to give you an introduction to a service that is perfect for loading data. And this service is Azure Data Factory. So let's get started. All right, Azure Data Factory, that's the topic for today. But as always, let's begin with our basic BI flow, because it will help us to position Data Factory in the overall architecture. So as you should remember already, at the beginning, we have various data sources. For example, files of various types, CSVs, Excels, JSON, and so on. Apart from that, usually we would have some kind of a database, SQL Server, Oracle, something that is on premises or in the cloud. Also, most likely, you would have to work with various types of APIs. And all of this stuff, let me just call it data sources. Data sources. Now, we already know that in our BI solution, we want to ingest the data and dump it to our raw layer just to have this immutable copy that is very useful in various cases. And we know that as the storage layer, we would like to use Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, because that's the service that has all those features that we need. So this is ADLS Gen 2. Let me just draw a nice icon. And we know that we want to structure or organize our data lake in a way that would prevent us from creating this data swamp. So the first layer in our data lake is called raw. That is used to store this one-to-one copy of source data. So what we would do as one of the first steps is to ingest data from various sources into this raw data layer. So let me write it down, that we want to ingest the data. Next, the data in its native format, it's usually not usable for reporting because either it has some quality issues, nulls, missing values, stupid data, and so on, or it lacks some business transformations. Business logic is not applied. So what we'll usually have to do is to transform the data that we stored in the raw layer using various rules that depend on our project. And the transformed data will be stored again somewhere. And usually it is again our data lake, but in a different layer than a row. Then, if we follow the modern data warehouse architecture, we'll have some kind of relational data warehouse. So let me draw it like this. That contains data stored as tables. So the next step would be just to load data from our data lake to the data warehouse. Then what we might have, again depending on the amount of data and complexity of our reports, we might already have Power BI service that will be used as our reporting layer. And here data also has to be loaded. Or let's just say that we will load data to Power BI. We'll cover that in details in future episodes. And lastly, we have our users who want to browse the reports. So this is our basic BI flow. And now, when we think about Azure Data Factory, let's try to position it into this picture. So basically, Data Factory is a service that does two things perfectly. So the first one is that Data Factory is able to copy data from one place to another in a very effective and easy way. And if you look at our diagram, it means that it is actually the ingest process, loading data from the source, various types of sources, and just dumping it into our raw layer in a data lake. And here, Data Factory is perfect, because out of the box, it has many connectors to various services, which means that there is high chance that the data source you want to connect to has already a connector available in Data Factory. So let me draw Data Factory here. So that's ADF. And I will refer to Data Factory as ADF throughout this course. So that's the first use case for ADF. The second one is orchestration. And let me write it down. So orchestration. So what does it mean? And again, if you take a look at our architecture, those green arrows, they represent the flow of our data. So you can see that it starts at the data sources, then we have to ingest the data, then transform it, then load data warehouse, then to Power BI, and those steps, number of those steps and their complexity, obviously they depend on the project. And orchestrating simply means putting those various activities in proper order. So they would be executed one after another. So together they would build our data flow. So that's what orchestration is all about. And here again, Data Factory is perfect solution, perfect service to use this. So these are two use cases for ADF. Copying data, which is ingestion, and orchestrating stuff. All right, so that was a brief introduction where ADF fits into our landscape. All right, so let's start now with a very simple ingest scenario that we can implement by using ADF. So let's assume that we want to ingest something. And let's say that our data source, for simplicity, actually let me move it down a little bit so we would have more space. Let's say that our data source is Azure SQL database, like so. So this is Azure SQL database. And now, Azure SQL database is not a part of the exam. It's not in the scope. It used to be in the past, but it is no longer the case. Which means that I will not focus too much on this service. At this moment, all you have to know about it, that it is basically a database in Azure. Something very similar we have on premises. So we will use this Azure SQL database as a source, and we will provision it using a backup. So it will be shipped with some data already. And what I will try to do is to take one of those tables inside this database, customer table, and ingest it to our data lake. So this Azure SQL database, it will be our data source. On the other side, as a destination, we would have our data lake. Because we know that when we create our BI solutions, our storage layer for raw data, for the data we want to ingest, is a data lake. So this is ADLS Gen 2. And we'll create this raw layer for it, for the data, for the customer data that we'll ingest. So that's our scenario. Very simple hello world kind of scenario. Grab data from a single table from Azure SQL database and just dump it into a data lake. And now, for simplicity, I will save it in a data lake as CSV files. But I will do this only because it will be easier later on for us to view the contents of the file. In real life, I would use Parquet. So actually, it might be a good task for you if you're following along and you want to practice stuff. Just do the steps that I will be doing here, but try to save the data as Parquet and see whether that worked. All right. So now where Data Factory fits here and what we have to create to make this data movement process successful. So Data Factory is a service that will use or that will interact with using a browser. And basically the first thing we would have to do when we start working with it is to create something called a linked service. So let me write it down. So linked service. That's the first thing we want to do. And simply put, a linked service is just a connection string, which indicates that, hey, I want to work with this particular instance of Azure SQL database. That's it. This is a linked service. It contains information about what service we want to connect to and how, what authentication to use, how to authorize, this type of stuff. And today, I will just ignore best practices about security. It will be completely unsecure solution, our data movement. But again, this is just a hello world example. Now, on the target side, on our data lake side, we will also need a linked service. This time, it will point to our data lake, like so. So two linked services, because we have source and a target. Now, once we create those linked services, the next thing I would like to create is a dataset. So dataset is a number 2. And what is a dataset? So dataset is simply a representation of our data associated with some linked service. So in our case, on the source side, it will indicate that it contains data from our customer table read from this particular instance of Azure SQL database. So this is dataset. On the other hand, we would need a second dataset as well. Dataset. This one will point to some file in a data lake, and it will contain some properties that are specific to CSV files. So even though both datasets, they will contain basically the same data, the same customer data, they will have properties that are specific to given linked service. So for example, on the destination side, so this dataset, it will contain information such as what column delimiter was used. Do we want to have a header inside our CSV file? How we want to encode it, and so on. So these are the properties specific to type of a linked service. All right, so these were the two things that we'll create. Next, what we'll create is a pipeline. So let me draw it. So let's say this is our pipeline. That's a number 3. Pipeline. And pipeline is just a logical grouping of various activities that we want to execute inside ADF. That's it. So it is just a container that groups all the tasks we want to do. Now, at this moment, our pipeline is just an empty shell. It doesn't contain anything. So we have to define the work we want ADF to do. So to do this, we would add various activities to our pipeline. So these rectangles, these are called activities. Activities. And we can define multiple activities inside our pipeline, and we can connect them like so. Let's say I would define 4 activities. And now those activities, they can be linked with each other to indicate how the processing should look like. So in this case, let's say that the second activity, the one in the middle, it will be executed after the first one, this one, finished successfully. And I use this green arrow that represents onSuccess connector, which means that the next activity will start executing only after the previous one succeeded. On the other hand, here I used the red connector, which means onError. So simply put, that activity, it will be executed only if the previous one, this one, failed, which means that it can have some error handling operations, such as send email if that pipeline failed, or undo some operations, or whatever we will define in our pipeline. Now, ADF is shipped with quite a number of various types of activities we'll use, and I will show them in a second. But please be aware that those activities are not we can use activities that will do something outside of ADF. So for example, you should remember that the second step after loading the data to the raw layer is the transformation, which means that the second step, it might be used to execute some transformation logic using some external service. Execute transform. It might be like this, right? Which means that ADF will be just this kind of a master who tells what should be done in what order. In the same way, we can modularize our pipelines into multiple smaller pipelines. So let's say this thing at the bottom, this is a small pipeline that contains just a quite reusable logic. Let's say that this is our generic error handling pipeline. So here, in case our main pipeline fails, we could just execute this generic error handler to handle the error. And now you should see that by using those connectors and various activities, that's how we can define our orchestration. That's how we orchestrate the whole process to execute various tasks one after another, depending on whether the previous one succeeded. But today we'll focus only on the data copying process. And to achieve that, we'll basically use only a single activity. That's what it takes to copy data from one place to another. That's why Data Factory is a perfect tool to load the data. And there is this fantastic activity called copy data that is used just for this, for copying data from one place to another. And we'll configure it and use it to copy data from Azure SQL database to a raw container. All right, so let's jump into Azure portal and let's create our resources, our database, our data lake, and data factory. And then we'll implement this pipeline. So let me start with creating Azure SQL database. And again, this is not in the scope of the exam, so you don't have to pay too much attention to it. But I would like to show all the steps that I'm doing, just that you have something that you can follow if you would like to test that in your Azure subscription. So as always, we have to select subscription and resource group whenever we are creating some resource. Then I have to give a name for my database, and let's call it AdventureWorks. AdventureWorks. Then I have to select a server, logical server. in which our database will be located. And right now I don't have any SQL servers, so let me quickly create a brand new SQL server. And let's give it some unique name like table training SQL. Let's move it to West Europe because that's the Azure region that is close to me. Let's select authentication methods that will be available on my server, and I will use just SQL authentication, which is not the best option. But again, today we are doing just hello world examples, so that is fine for today. We will do it in a better way in future episodes. So let me provide a admin and password for this SQL server. Like this. Hopefully I didn't make a typo. So that's our server. Now I have to set, let's say, compute and storage, this part, which tells Azure how powerful my database will be. And I don't want to go with the defaults because it's too expensive, and I will switch to basic mode. And again, I don't want to deep dive into it, what it actually means. It's not important in this moment. What I want to do is to make sure that in the additional settings, I will make sure to use a sample data. So my SQL database will be created with AdventureWorks database. So it will contain some tables and some data inside, because that's what we need at this moment. So let me create it. Alright, so the SQL database is being deployed. So the second thing we want to create is a data lake, or the storage account to be more precise. So let me create a storage account. Let's create a brand new storage account. And again, I have to choose my subscription and resource group. Let's give it a globally unique name like table data lake demo. Let's keep it in West Europe. The remaining options, let's go with defaults, except for this one checkbox that turns regular blob storage into a data lake. And we want to have a data lake. So that's it. And let's create this storage account. Yes, please create it. Alright, so it is being created. And the last thing we have to create is a Azure Data Factory. So let me start typing Data Factory. And there it is, Data Factories. So again, let's create new Data Factory. And then we'll configure SQL Server and our data lake so we could start working with it. And again, in the case of Data Factory, we have to again select subscription and resource group. Let's give it some name like table ADF. Let's store it, let's deploy it in West Europe. And that's it. Remaining stuff I will leave as defaults for now. Later on, we will revisit those options and see which ones of them should be changed to make our data factory better. Alright, in the meantime, I believe that some of our resources have been already created. So we have SQL Server and a storage account. So let's move into our data lake and let's create our row layer. So row layer starts with creating a container, this top level, let's call it directory, called row, like this. Now, inside our row layer, I would like to organize our data in a proper way. So let's say that Actually, I would like to start with name of the SQL server from which our data is retrieved. Actually, I forgot how I called it, so let's call it table SQL server. Maybe that was the name. I forgot. So that would be the first level in our row directory. Then let's create another directory for name of the database, like AdventureWorks. Then let's create a directory for a dataset. In our case, it will be customer, because that's the table that I want to extract. Then let's partition it by ingestion date or extraction date, like year equal to 2023. Then let's do something similar for a month. Month equal to 10. And finally, let's add a directory for a day. Oops. Day equal to 20. And now, at this moment, I'm doing this manually, which is obviously not the ideal approach. In future episodes, we'll automate this stuff. All right, so our data lake is ready. So you can see that we've got this nice hierarchy, a row container, and then name of the server, name of the database, name of the table, and then partitioned by ingest and date. All right, so let's jump into our database and let's make one change that will be required so ADF could connect to it. So on my SQL server, let's go to the networking tab, this one, and let me open the firewall just to everyone, which is bad practice. But again, today I don't want to focus on security. Today I want to just create this very simple scenario. All right, so our Azure SQL database should allow connections from trusted Azure services, and ADF is one of them. All right, so let's finally jump into Data Factory and let's start ingesting the data. So at this time, the service should be already deployed. So let me just find it on the list, and there it is. This stuff, this is our Data Factory. So let's open it. And to work with Data Factory, you just launch the Studio, and this is a web browser experience. So whenever you want to develop something using Data Factory, you just open your web browser and drag and click stuff there. There is no local possibility of implementing stuff using Data Factory, like in Visual Studio. No, you do it using a web browser. All right, so that's how Data Factory looks like. And on the left-hand side, let me expand this. You've got those various blades that group various properties or various features into these nice 5 tabs. Like home, that's the home screen that we are seeing right now. There is the outer tab inside which we will create our pipelines. There's a monitoring tab, which, as you can guess, is used to monitor execution of our pipelines. And there is some tab for managing our Data Factory, and a learning center that you can use to get more information about Data Factory. All right, and the first thing in our diagram was to create those linked services, those connection strings. So let's do this. And actually, to create linked services, we have to jump into this Manage tab. And here, under Connections, you should see this linked service option. So let me create a brand new linked service. And here we have to choose either a data store to which we want to connect or a compute service to which we want to connect. In our case, we want to connect to a Azure SQL database. And please take note how many different services are available out of the box. Quite a lot. So there is a high chance that there is already a connector available to most of the services to which you have to connect. Alright, so let me start typing SQL, and this one, Azure SQL Database, that's the one to which we want to connect. SQL, that's the one. Please continue. Let's give our linked service a good name, like Azure SQL DB linked service. Usually I would provide, or actually, let's call it Adventure Works. Adventure Works. Because we want to connect here to a specific instance of our database. Now let's select the database to which we want to connect. And I will use this nice drop-down experience that shows all databases to which I have access. So I chose the subscription, then the server name, the stable training SQL, that's the name of my SQL server that we just created, and then a database which is Adventure Works. Next, we have to define how we want to authenticate to our database, and today I will use SQL authentication, which is generally not advised because it's not that secure as other methods, but for now it will be fine. So I will provide my username that we created when I was provisioning the SQL server. I will hard code my password here. Again, bad practice, but for now it will be fine. And finally, let's test the connection, whether from connectivity point of view everything works. And you can see this green checkbox that connection was successful. So yes, let's create my linked service, my connection string to a database. Alright, so we have this linked service created. Right now, let's create something similar for our data lake. So let's jump into linked services and let's start typing data lake. And that's the service that we want to choose. Oh, come on, data lake. And let's call it our ADLS Gen 2 linked service. This LS, it stands for linked service in my case. And again, I will stick with default authentication type, which again is not advised to use. And I will choose the storage account that we want to use in the case of this linked service. So I will just select the one that we just created. It's stable data lake demo. That's the one. Let's verify that connectivity works. It should. And yes. And let's create our linked service. So at this moment, we have source linked service and the destination linked services created. So let's move on and let's create two datasets. All right. And now to create a dataset, we've got to switch to the Author tab. So let's move there. And here you can see that we've got various factory resources organized in groups like pipelines, change data capture, datasets, data flows, and Power Query. And we'll cover that in future episodes, what they mean. Today, let's just create a new dataset. And here, first we've got to indicate to what kind of a data store this dataset will refer. And in our case, we want to create a dataset that will be used together with a linked service pointing to a Azure SQL database. So that's why I'm choosing again Azure SQL database like this. Let's give it a name. And we know that we want to create a dataset for a customer table. So let's call it customer SQL DS. DS stands for dataset. Let's choose a linked service that will be associated with our dataset. And we have only one linked service of Azure SQL database type. So let's choose it. And finally, let's select a table from our database that our dataset should represent. And I want to use this sales.lt.customer table. That's our table. And let's just create it. And it should work. Yes, so dataset has been created. Here in the middle, you can see some properties of it. And to verify that it works, we can click on this preview data button. And if everything is configured properly, we should see some data retrieved from our database, from our customer table. And yes, we can see that it works. And actually here, you should see data like first name, middle name, and last name, which is basically a PII data, which from legal point of view might be problematic. But for now, let's just ignore this and let's assume that we are allowed to process this type of data. All right, so our SQL dataset, our source dataset is ready. So let's create another dataset, but this time that will be used together with our data lake. So let's choose a data store of Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 type. That's the one. Then we've got to choose a file format that will be associated with our dataset. And some of those types we already covered. Please take a note that there is no Delta format available here, but there is Parquet. But right now I would like to save our data as CSV. And CSV is represented here as this delimited text option. Oh, come on, please. New dataset. I'm using Zoomit to draw or to highlight some areas of the screen. And whenever I press escape to quit Zoomit, ADF understands this escape as that I want to abandon creating a dataset or a linked service, and it forgets everything that I was creating. Anyway, we want to use this CSV format like this. Let's give a name to our dataset like customer CSV dataset. Let's indicate what linked service we want to use. So that's the linked service to our data lake. Then let's provide a path on our data lake location where we want our file to be saved or to be stored. And I will use this browse button to quite easily indicate proper location using this visual experience. So it will be in our raw container, then inside our table SQL server, and then AdventureWorks database, customer dataset, and then year, month, and day. And that's it. So that's the path that was filled right here. And let's provide a file name. So let's call it customer.csv. And now I want this first row as header checkbox to be checked because I want to have a header. And I will not import a schema right now because simply at this location in a data lake, there is no file available. So ADF will not be able to import the schema from the file. So let's just create the dataset as is. All right. Now, if I try to preview our data using this CSV dataset, it will fail, obviously, because at this moment, there is no file available at that location because we haven't run the pipeline yet that copies the data. And also here on our data set, you can see those various properties that are specific to CSV files, like what column delimiter we want to use, what row delimiter we want to use, what encoding should be set, what escape character should be used, and so on. And please compare it with our customer dataset that doesn't have those properties, because in case of databases, they make no sense. All right, so we have linked services and datasets created. So let's move on and let's create our pipeline. So let's get back to Azure Data Factory and let's create a new pipeline. Let's call it demo pipeline, like so. Let's hide this. And here in the middle, that's our canvas. That's here. That's where we would just drag and drop various activities. And here on the list, you can see quite a lot of different types of activities we can use. And the one we'll be using right now is the copy data one, which is extremely powerful. So let's just drag it to the canvas. And I want to show you that actually we could create some other activities if you want. We could connect them using those various connectors, so they would together create our flow. And that's how easy it is to use Data Factory to orchestrate the whole process. But right now, let me remove those additional activities because we don't need them. And let's focus on our copy data activity. Now, it has a lot of properties that we should set, and in real projects we would do this. But today, let's just focus on this very simple copying data from one place to another. We will revisit those various properties in future episodes. So the most important thing here is first set the source and target. So the Data Factory would know what we want to copy from where to where. And source tab, source tab is the place where we define, well, our source. And here we've got to just provide a data set that we would like to use as a source. So let us choose a customer SQL dataset, because that's the dataset that represents customer data read from Azure SQL database. Like so. Let's leave those options as they are. For now, they are fine. And let's move on to the destination site. And in ADF, it is called sync. And the first time I worked with ADF, I was, what the hell is this sync? And sync simply means destination or a target. And actually, it was renamed in Microsoft Fabric. It is no longer called sync, but here it is. So sync is our destination. So again, here we've got to select a data set that will represent the data and the place to which we want to save our data. And here let's select our customer CSV dataset, because we want to save our data as CSV file in our data lake, like so. And that's it. Let's leave remaining options as they are. Let me publish all our changes to the Data Factory. And in future episodes, I will explain what this publishing means. For now, let's just think about it, that we make them persistent. All right, so it has been published successfully. And actually, let's get back to the drawing, because I forgot about one thing. So once we created all this stuff, the pipeline is ready, how do we execute it? And basically, that's the fifth thing we would do is to define a trigger. And trigger, as the name implies, is used, well, to define how often and when our pipeline has to start. And there are different types of triggers. The most common one, I would say, is a schedule trigger. Schedule trigger, which simply means that you would select a particular point, time during the day when you want your pipeline to be executed. Let's say every midnight. That's it. And that's how simple it would be to schedule executing of your pipeline. So let's get back to our data factory. And actually, I wouldn't create a new trigger right now, because what I want to do is to execute it at this moment as I was developing. So I would use this trigger now option to execute our pipeline. So let's use it. And here you can see that actually we have a possibility to provide values of some parameters, but at this moment our pipeline doesn't contain any. But it should give you a hint that probably we could make our pipeline, our processing, more dynamic, more flexible. And we'll cover that in future episodes. For now, let's just run it. So click OK, and the pipeline has been started. And now, when we want to execute, when we want to monitor the performance and execution of our pipelines, we should go to the Monitor tab. So let's go to this place. And here, actually, our pipeline has already finished successfully. So you should see this row with the status succeeded. And it took like 15 seconds to process. So let's verify whether our data was actually saved as CSV file in a data lake. So let's jump back to our data lake. Let's go to our day directory, and there it is. We've got this customer CSV file that was just created, and let's take a look at its content, whether it really contains our customer data. And there it is. And we have, as defined, we have a header in the first row, and then we've got rows with our customer data. We use commas as a column delimiter and so on, exactly as we specified in the customer CSV dataset. All right, and that was it. So today I wanted to create this very simple hello world type of scenario using Data Factory to show you how easy it is to load data from one place and dump it in another one. And that's the perfect use case for ADF, as usually the first step we are doing in our BI solutions is data ingestion. And Data Factory is a perfect fit for this. The second place where Data Factory shines is orchestrating the whole workflow, the whole process that defines what we want to do with our data. Maybe it wasn't visible today because today we had only this single copy activity, but in the future episodes, as we'll be adding more and more steps to our processing, you will see how nicely it can be used to orchestrate the whole process. And now, the pipeline that we created today is ugly. It's not production ready. It is not secure. The way we connected to SQL and to data lake is terrible. There is no security applied at all. Networking stuff, we just ignored it today. But it was done on purpose to show you this very simple scenario. And don't worry, we'll revisit those things in future episodes, and we'll continue to improve our pipeline to make it more secure, more dynamic, more production ready. So that's it for today. I hope you like it and see you soon. Take care.